Here's something I've heard for a long time. Harrison Ford only returned to Star Wars so he could have Han Solo killed off. This is a thing that I've seen on message board, social media, and even on bathroom walls. But I never have heard if this is facts or just internet fan gossip. So I thought I would take a look into this. First, let's go all the way back to 1983, where an earthquake has hit New York City. People were able to buy the first mobile phone. Carrie Underwood was just born. A dozen eggs would cost you about 80 cents, and Fraggle Rock rocked its way into our hearts, right as Pac-Man was finally eaten by the network ghost after only 2 seasons. At the theater, it was the end, or so we thought, of the Star Wars saga. We have been debating since 1980, would Han Solo die? Rumors were all over the playground that Ford was the only cast member not designed for the final installment. Here it was, Return of the Jedi, and yes, Harrison Ford was back as Han Solo. Fans were happy to see Han get unfrozen and help the rebels to victory. But what did Harrison Ford think of the end of Han Solo? Did Ford really want George Lucas to kill him off? Well, the fact is, Ford did talk with Lucas about having Han Solo killed off because he felt Solo had no place to go, that the character had grown all it could. Now we have heard this rumor that Ford wanted Solo to die because he hated Han Solo, but that's not really the truth. Harrison Ford believed it was best for the character and the movie, not because he hated Han Solo, but he wanted Han Solo to make the ultimate sacrifice for the rebels. So we can say it's true Harrison Ford wanted Han Solo to be killed at the end of Return of the Jedi. But it's not true that Ford wanted this to happen because he hated the character Han Solo. But it is true that Harrison Ford isn't a big fan of the Han Solo character.
Would you do another Star Wars? Would you do another? No? No?
The character doesn't really interest me that much, and I don't think he's got as much depth as we can bring to the character of Indiana Jones.
If Ford didn't want to play Solo ever again, does this mean Harrison Ford only came back to Star Wars to kill him off? No, not really. Why would Ford return to playing someone he really didn't like, unless it was to put a nail in the coffin? Well, Ford says they came up with a great script and hired a director that he strongly desired to work with. Now I believe that's part of the reason, but there might also be another reason Ford returned to Star Wars. Let's be honest, Harrison Ford's star wasn't shining as bright in the last 10 years before The Force Awakens. He needed a hit film, and everyone knew the new Star Wars film would be a hit. Good or bad, it would be a huge hit. And let's not forget, according to the Daily Mail, Ford was paid $25 million to return. That's a hard offer to turn down.
You are so money and you don't even know it.
So Harrison Ford returned for the script, the director, and maybe for the hit film. But this doesn't mean he didn't demand that Han Solo be killed off during The Force Awakens. For that answer, we have to turn to writer and director of The Force Awakens, J.J. Abrams, and see what he had to say about Han Solo.
I had thought Han's story and Leia's story was just about them coming back together. At the end of the movie they would have reconciled and gotten over their differences. And you would have said, okay, bad stuff happened, but at least they're back together again. What is Han doing in this movie if we are not going to have something important and irreversible happen to him? Then he kind of feels like luggage. He feels like this great, sexy piece of luggage you have in your movie. But he's not really evolving. He's not really pushing the story forward.
With his words, we can assume that JJ and co-writer Lawrence Kasdan had written a draft, or at least came up with a story of Han Solo not dying during The Force Awakens. He goes on to add that they needed to make Kylo a good villain, and had to do something bold, and that was to kill off Han Solo. So it seems they were not under any deal that said Han Solo must die in The Force Awakens. But when did Harrison Ford agree to return? George Lucas said in an Entertainment Weekly interview on March 2013 that Mark Hamill, Carrie Fisher, and yes, Harrison Ford had signed to return for Episode 8. It was announced a few months earlier that J.J. Abrams would direct Episode 8. So this was kind of clear that Ford was signed to return before J.J. Abrams was hired, or at least before Abrams and Lawrence Kasdan had a script or even a first draft. However, there was a working script before J.J. was attached to the film. Could Han Solo have died in this first draft, and that's why Harrison Ford signed on? Well, that script was never completely finished, and Lawrence Kasdan says when he came to help write Episode 8, they didn't know anything about the story. All they knew is who was going to be in the movie and who wasn't. The first draft was done November 2013, with a shooting script ready by January 2014. What does all this tell us? Well, it tells us that Harrison Ford had agreed to return as Han Solo before anything was written that Han Solo would be killed off. It also tells us that J.J. Abrams and Lawrence Kasdan was never told to kill off Han Solo. And it tells us that Lawrence Kasdan and J.J. Abrams decided to kill off Han Solo. Harrison Ford had nothing to do with Han Solo being killed in The Force Awakens. If Han Solo didn't die, Harrison Ford would have still been in The Force Awakens. So the myth that Harrison Ford only agreed to return to Star Wars was if Han Solo was killed off is false.
It's a total fabrication. It never happened. It never happened. This one was invented by a writer. Not this time. It never happened.
Thank you for watching, and please hit that subscribe button and give us a thumbs up. And until the next video, we'll talk again soon.
Hey, Junkman channel popping though.
Thank you, sir, for that unsolicited testimony.